I never imagined that the worst moment of my life would happen at my own brother's wedding, in front of 200 people, when my 6-year-old daughter handed him a homemade card, and he read it aloud with a cruel smile on his face. The invitation to David's wedding had arrived 3 months earlier, embossed in gold on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Veronica Sterling and David Miller request the pleasure of your company. I had stared at it for a long time, my fingers trembling slightly as I held the expensive paper. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to pretend it had gotten lost in the mail. My relationship with David had been strained for years, ever since our father passed away and the will was read. There had been arguments about the family business, about the house in Connecticut, about a dozen little things that added up to a wall of resentment between us. But he was still my brother. And despite everything, some foolish part of me hoped that maybe this wedding, this new chapter in his life, might soften him. Maybe Veronica would be a good influence. Maybe we could find our way back to something that resembled a family. So I RSVP'd yes, for myself and my daughter Lily. Lily was excited about the wedding. At 6 years old, she loved any excuse to dress up, and the idea of a fancy party at a resort in the Hamptons seemed like something out of a fairy tale to her. She spent weeks making a card for Uncle David and his bride, carefully drawing flowers and hearts with her colored pencils, practicing her letters over and over until they were just right. I was working 2 jobs at the time, trying to keep us afloat after my divorce from Lily's father 3 years earlier. Mark had left when Lily was just a toddler, disappeared without a trace, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a lot of unanswered questions. I had slowly rebuilt our lives, piece by piece, but money was always tight. The trip to the Hamptons meant dipping into my emergency fund, but I told myself it would be worth it. Family was supposed to be worth it. The morning of the wedding, I helped Lily into the pale pink dress we had found at a consignment shop. She twirled in front of the mirror, her dark curls bouncing around her shoulders. She looked so happy, so innocent. I wish I could have frozen that moment forever, before everything shattered. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit. The resort was perched on a cliff, overlooking the ocean, with white roses everywhere and a string quartet playing softly. David looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman he had become. Veronica was stunning in a designer gown that probably cost more than my car. She came from old money, the kind of family that summered in Martha's Vineyard and had their names on hospital wings. I sat in the back with Lily, feeling out of place in my department store dress. Around us, guests whispered about hedge funds and yacht clubs and vacation homes in Aspen. I caught my mother's eye across the aisle. Eleanor Miller looked elegant as always, her silver hair perfectly styled, but there was something tight around her mouth, a tension I couldn't quite read. The reception was held in the resort's grand ballroom, with crystal chandeliers and tables set with china that probably cost more per plate than I made in a week. Lily was enchanted by everything. The ice sculpture, the elaborate floral centerpieces, the waiters circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. After dinner, there were toasts. David's college roommate told a story about their fraternity days that made everyone laugh. Veronica's father gave a speech about family and legacy and the importance of choosing the right partner. Then David stood up to thank everyone for coming. That was when Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Mommy, can I give them my card now?" My heart swelled with pride at her thoughtfulness. "Of course, sweetheart. That's very nice of you." She clutched her homemade card, slightly crumpled from being carried in her little purse all day, and made her way through the tables toward the head table where David and Veronica Saturday. I watched her go, smiling at how carefully she walked in her dress shoes, how serious her little face looked. David saw her coming, and his expression shifted into something I couldn't quite identify. He bent down as she approached, and I could see her holding out the card, her voice too quiet for me to hear from where I Saturday. But I saw David take it, saw him straighten up, and then I saw him do something that made my blood run cold. He opened the card and began to read it aloud. "Congratulations, Uncle David and Miss Veronica." His voice carried across the ballroom, amplified by the microphone he had been using for his toast. "From Lily, the fake daughter of Aunt Zelda." The room fell completely silent. 200 people stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped breathing. I felt the weight of their stares turn toward me like a physical force. Lily had written, "From Lily, daughter of Auntie Zelda," in her careful 6-year-old handwriting. But David had inserted that word, that cruel, devastating word. Fake. He looked directly at me across the ballroom, and I saw the malice in his eyes. The calculated cruelty. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. He smiled, a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice still amplified for the entire room to hear. "The kid's not wrong, I suppose. She's not really blood family anyway." I couldn't breathe. The room spun around me. I saw my mother's face go pale, her hand flying to her mouth. I saw Veronica turn to David with an expression of shock. Or maybe it was something else, something harder to read. I saw the guests exchanging glances, some uncomfortable, some curious, some already pulling out their phones. But mostly I saw Lily, standing in front of that head table, her little face confused and scared because she knew something bad had happened, but she didn't understand what. I was on my feet before I even realized I was moving. I crossed the ballroom, in what felt like seconds, my heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. I scooped Lily up into my arms, holding her tight against me as she started to cry. "How dare you?" I said to David, my voice shaking with fury. "She's 6 years old." He leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed, that awful smile still on his face. "Just stating facts, Zelda. No need to get so dramatic." "You're a monster," I said, and then I turned and walked out, carrying Lily, not caring that everyone was staring, not caring that I was making a scene. All I cared about was getting my daughter away from that place, away from him. I made it to the parking lot before I started shaking so badly I had to set Lily down. She clung to my legs, crying, asking what she had done wrong. I knelt down and held her face in my hands. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Nothing at all. Uncle David was very mean, and that's not your fault." But she kept crying, and I kept holding her, and inside I felt something break open, some dam that had been holding back years of hurt and anger and resentment. I should have seen it coming. I should have known David would never let me just exist peacefully on the edges of his perfect life, but I had been naive enough to hope for better. That hope died in that ballroom, in front of 200 witnesses. I got Lily into the car and drove back to the small bed and breakfast where we were staying. She fell asleep on the drive, exhausted from crying. I carried her inside and tucked her into bed, still in her pink dress, her face blotchy and tear-stained. Then I sat on the edge of my own bed and finally let myself fall apart. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk, tomorrow morning, please." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, listening to my daughter breathe, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, but a few were from old family friends, from my mother, from David's assistant. The gossip had already spread. Someone had filmed David reading Lily's card, and the video was making the rounds on social media. "Businessman humiliates niece at wedding," one headline read. But there were also comments supporting David, people saying he was just being honest, that I was the one making a scene. I ignored all of it. I packed our bags, checked out of the bed and breakfast, and drove home to our small apartment in Brooklyn. Lily was quiet the whole way, staring out the window, and that scared me more than her crying had. But I couldn't hide forever. 3 days after the wedding, David showed up at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole and my first instinct was to not answer. But he knocked again, harder this time, and I heard him say, "I know you're in there, Zelda. Open the door." I glanced back at Lily, who was coloring at the kitchen table. "Stay there, sweetheart," I said. And then I opened the door but didn't step aside to let him in. David looked as polished as ever in an expensive suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. He could have been posing for a magazine cover. But his eyes were cold. "We need to talk," he said. "I have nothing to say to you. You humiliated my daughter." I stated a fact. She's not blood family. You've been using her to try to get sympathy, to position yourself for a bigger piece of the inheritance. I know your game, Zelda. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. "What are you talking about? What inheritance? Dad left everything to you in the business. I got nothing." "Exactly. And you've been trying to change that, haven't you? Playing the struggling single mother, bringing your kid around mom, making sure everyone sees how hard you have it. Well, it's not going to work. I know all about Mark, about what he was really involved in, and I know that Lily isn't even genetically yours." The world tilted. "What did you just say?" David smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I had ever seen on a human face. "You think I don't know? You think I haven't done my research? Mark was running a scam, Zelda. And you were either in on it, or you were the biggest fool in New York. Either way, that kid in there isn't your biological daughter. She's probably some drug addict's baby that Mark brought home to complete his perfect little family picture. And if you try to come after me for any of the family money, I'll make sure everyone knows. I'll make sure you lose custody. I'll make sure you lose everything." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. How did he know? How could he possibly know? The truth was complicated. Mark and I had tried for years to have a baby, and it never happened. He had suggested adoption, but the process was long and expensive. Then one day he came home with a newborn, a tiny baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. He said a friend of his, a woman going through a difficult time, had asked us to take care of her daughter. It was supposed to be temporary, but the woman never came back. Mark said she had given up her rights, that it was all legal, that Lily was ours now. I had asked questions at first. I had worried, but Mark had papers, documents that looked official. And I had fallen in love with that baby so completely, so instantly, that I let myself believe it was all legitimate. By the time Mark left, Lily was 3 years old, and she was my daughter in every way that mattered. I had raised her, loved her, been there for every moment. Biology didn't matter. But legally, it was a mess. I had discovered, after Mark disappeared, that some of the adoption papers were forged. I had been working with a lawyer to try to formalize everything, to make sure Lily was legally mine. But it was complicated and expensive, and I had been taking it one step at a time. And somehow, David knew about all of it. "You're despicable," I whispered. "I'm practical," David said. "And I'm warning you, stay in your lane, Zelda. Don't try to claim anything from this family. Don't try to turn Mom against me. Just accept your place and we can all move on." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. "Oh, and you might want to check your work email. I have some friends in your industry. Thought they should know about your situation. Character references matter, you know." Then he was gone, and I was standing in my doorway, shaking with rage and fear. I checked my email. There was a message from my manager at the marketing firm where I worked part-time. "Need to see you first thing Monday. Urgent." My stomach dropped. Over the next week, everything fell apart. I lost my marketing job because, as my manager delicately put it, the company couldn't afford any negative publicity, and my family drama was all over social media. A freelance contract I had been counting on suddenly fell through, the client citing unforeseen circumstances. Friends stopped returning my calls. Lily's preschool teacher pulled me aside to say that some of the other parents had been asking questions, and maybe it would be better if Lily finished out the year at home. David was systematically destroying my life, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. I tried to talk to my mother, but she was different now, distant. When I finally got her on the phone, she sounded tired and old in a way I had never heard before. "Zelda, honey, I don't know what to say. David showed me some things, some documents about Mark, about Lily's adoption. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter, Mom. She's my daughter. I love her." "I know you do, sweetie. But David is worried about the family name, about the business. He thinks it's best if we all just take a step back for a while. Let things calm down." "He's lying to you, Mom. He's manipulating you." "Don't say things like that. He's your brother. He's trying to protect the family." I hung up feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Not for my sake, but for Lily's. She deserved better than this. She deserved a mother who would fight for her. I made an appointment with Ben Carter, a lawyer I had gone to college with. Ben had always been sharp, ambitious, and more importantly, he had always been fair. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I called him and gave him the basics of the situation, he agreed to see me right away. His office was in a modest building in downtown Manhattan, nothing like the glass towers where David conducted his business. But when I sat across from Ben in his cluttered office, surrounded by law books and case files, I felt the first glimmer of hope I had felt in weeks. I told him everything. The wedding, the humiliation, David's threats, the forged adoption papers, Mark's disappearance, the way David had systematically cut me off from my family and destroyed my professional reputation. Ben listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This is bigger than I thought. David isn't just being cruel, Zelda. He's engaged in a coordinated campaign of harassment and intimidation. And based on what you're telling me about your father's estate and the family business, I think there might be more going on." "What do you mean?" "Your father's will. Did you ever actually read it?" I shook my head. David said it all went to him and the business. He said Dad wanted to keep everything intact, that dividing it up would destroy what he built. Ben leaned back in his chair. "But you never saw the actual will?" "No. David handled everything. He said it was too complicated for me to worry about." "I need to see that will," Ben said. "And I need to do some digging into your father's business structure, the trusts, everything. Because here's the thing, Zelda. If David is this desperate to discredit you, to push you out of the family, there's usually a reason. Usually, that reason is money." Over the next month, Ben dug into my father's estate with the tenacity of a detective. He found records that had been sealed, tracked down the lawyer who had drafted my father's will, and uncovered a trust fund that I had never known existed. It turned out my father had set up a substantial trust for any grandchildren, to be released when they turned 18. Lily, as his granddaughter, whether biological or adopted, would be entitled to a significant portion of that trust, but only if her adoption was legal and finalized. David had been blocking the adoption proceedings. He had used his connections to delay the court dates, to create bureaucratic obstacles, all while making it look like natural legal process. Because if Lily wasn't legally my daughter, she couldn't claim the trust, and that money would revert back to the estate, which David controlled. There was more. My father's will had included provisions for me, a share of the business and a portion of the estate. But David had presented me with a different document years ago, claiming it was a settlement agreement where I had waived my rights in exchange for a small payment. I had signed it without reading it carefully, trusting my brother, desperate for any money to help with Lily's medical bills at the time. That document had been witnessed and notarized, and it effectively cut me out of the inheritance. But Ben found something interesting. The witness who had signed that document was David's executive assistant at the time, and that assistant had since filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against David's company. Ben tracked her down, and she was willing to talk. Her name was Patricia Reeves, and she met us at a coffee shop in Queens on a cold October afternoon. She was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and an air of someone who had been beaten down by the system. "He's a monster," she said without preamble. "I worked for David Miller for 8 years, and I saw things that would make your skin crawl. The way he treats people, the way he manipulates situations to get what he wants. When I wouldn't go along with one of his schemes, he fired me and blacklisted me in the industry." "Tell me about the document I signed," I said, "the settlement agreement." Patricia's face darkened. "He wrote that himself. The whole thing was a setup. He called you in when you were desperate, when your daughter was sick and you needed money for her treatment. He knew you'd sign anything, and he had me witness it, told me it was just a standard family agreement. I didn't know at the time that he was essentially stealing your inheritance." "Will you testify to that?" Ben asked. Patricia hesitated, fear crossing her face. "He'll destroy me." "He's already destroyed you," I said quietly. "Just like he destroyed me, but we can stop him. We can make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." Patricia looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll testify. Someone needs to stand up to him." With Patricia's testimony and the evidence Ben had gathered, we had a case, but Ben wanted more. He wanted ironclad proof of David's fraud and manipulation. He wanted enough evidence that David couldn't weasel his way out with expensive lawyers and family connections. That was when Veronica Sterling entered the picture in an unexpected way. I received an email from an anonymous account. The message was brief. "Your brother is not who he says he is. I have information that can help you. We should meet." I showed it to Ben, who was immediately suspicious, but something about the email's tone made me think it might be legitimate. We arranged a meeting at a public place, a busy restaurant in Midtown, with Ben accompanying me for safety. The woman who walked in was Veronica Sterling, David's wife. She looked different than she had at the wedding. Still elegant, still poised, but there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had always been there, and I just hadn't noticed. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from us. "I imagine you're surprised." "That's putting it mildly," I said. "Why are you here?" Veronica pulled out a folder and set it on the table. "Because I'm not a fool. I knew David was ambitious when I married him, but I didn't realize the extent of his corruption. After the wedding, after what he did to your daughter, I started paying more attention, and I didn't like what I found." She opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, emails, recorded phone conversations. Evidence of David's various schemes, not just against me, but against business partners, clients, even his own investors. "David has been embezzling from his own company," Veronica said flatly. "He's been cooking the books, hiding money in offshore accounts, and setting up shell corporations to funnel funds. My family's lawyers have been investigating our joint finances for the prenup modification he wanted, and they uncovered all of this. I'm filing for divorce, but I'm also making sure he faces criminal charges." I stared at the documents, hardly believing what I was seeing. "Why are you giving this to me?" Veronica's expression softened slightly. "Because what he did to your little girl was unforgivable, and because I've learned enough about the situation to know he stole from you too. He brags about it when he thinks I'm not listening, about how he outsmarted his sister, about how he made sure you'd never get what you were owed. I won't be married to a man like that. And I won't let him get away with it." Ben was already examining the documents, his eyes widening as he read. "This is incredible. This is exactly what we need." Over the next few weeks, we built an airtight case. Ben filed a lawsuit to contest the settlement agreement I had signed, citing fraud and coercion. He filed motions to finalize Lily's adoption, with evidence that David had been deliberately obstructing the legal process. And he worked with Veronica's lawyers to build a criminal case against David for embezzlement, fraud, and a dozen other charges. But I wanted one more thing. I wanted to face him. I wanted him to know that he hadn't broken me. Ben arranged a family meeting at my mother's house in Connecticut, the house where David and I had grown up. He told my mother it was urgent, that it concerned the family estate. He told David that it was about settling things once and for all, avoiding a public scandal. David agreed, probably thinking he could control the narrative one more time. The meeting was set for a Sunday afternoon. I drove up from Brooklyn with Lily, who was excited to see her grandmother's house. She had only been there a handful of times, always brief, awkward visits. I had kept her away, trying to protect her from the toxic dynamics of my family. But today, she needed to be there. She needed to see that I would fight for her. My mother answered the door, looking nervous and frail. She had aged a decade in the last few months. "Zelda, honey, I'm not sure what this is about, but David seems very upset." "It's going to be okay, Mom," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We gathered in the living room, the same room where we used to open Christmas presents as children. David was already there, pacing, his phone in his hand. He looked up when I entered, and his face twisted into a sneer. What is this, Zelda? What kind of ambush are you planning? It's not an ambush, Ben said, entering behind me with his briefcase. It's an intervention, and a reckoning. Veronica arrived a few minutes later, and David's face went pale when he saw her. What are you doing here? Ensuring justice is served, Veronica said coolly, taking a seat across from him. Ben opened his briefcase and began laying out documents on the coffee table. David Miller, you've engaged in a systematic campaign of fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. You've stolen from your own sister, manipulated legal proceedings, and committed multiple felonies in the process of enriching yourself at the expense of your family and your business partners. David laughed, but it sounded forced. This is ridiculous. You can't prove any of that. Actually, we can, Ben said, and he began going through the evidence, piece by piece, the forged settlement agreement, Patricia's testimony, the bank records showing David's embezzlement, the emails where he had coordinated the campaign to destroy my reputation, the proof that he had been blocking Lily's adoption. With each revelation, David's face grew paler. My mother sat frozen, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. You stole from me, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. You stole my inheritance, you tried to steal my daughter's future, and you did everything you could to destroy my life. Why, David? Why did you hate me so much? For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then something in him seemed to break. Because you were always the favorite, he said, his voice bitter. Dad always loved you more. You were the smart one, the creative one, the one who could do no wrong. And when he got sick, when he was dying, he changed his will. He left you half of everything, equal partners in the business. He said I needed you to balance me out, to keep me honest. But I had already worked so hard, sacrificed so much for that business. I wasn't going to let him give it all away to you, just because you were his precious daughter. So you made me sign it away, I said. When I was desperate and scared and my daughter was sick, you manipulated me into giving up everything I was owed. You would have run the business into the ground, David said. You didn't deserve it. That wasn't your decision to make, my voice rose, all the hurt and anger of the past years pouring out. You had no right. And you definitely had no right to humiliate my daughter, to threaten her adoption, to try to take away the only family she's ever known. She's not even your real daughter, David spat. She's some stranger's kid that your con artist husband brought home. She's my daughter in every way that matters. I was shouting now, years of pain and rage finally finding voice. I've raised her, loved her, been there for every moment of her life, and you tried to destroy her just to hurt me. You're not just a thief, David. You're a monster. The room was silent except for my mother's quiet sobbing. Veronica stood up. I've heard enough. David, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm cooperating fully with the authorities in their investigation of your crimes. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. You can't do this, David said, desperation creeping into his voice for the first time. Veronica, we're married. We're partners. We were married, Veronica corrected coldly, for 3 months. 3 months in which I discovered that the man I thought I knew was actually a criminal and an abuser. I won't tie my family's name to yours any longer. She left, and the sound of the door closing behind her seemed to echo through the house. Ben stood up next. David, you have 2 options. You can agree to return everything you've stolen from Zelda, finalize Lily's adoption without any further obstruction, and resign from the family business. In exchange, we'll pursue the criminal charges but recommend leniency. Or you can fight us, and we'll drag every dirty secret you have into public court. Your choice. David looked around the room, at me, at our mother, at Ben's implacable expression. I saw the moment he realized he had lost. His shoulders slumped, and he suddenly looked much older than his 38 years. Fine, he said quietly. I'll do it. Just make it go away. It's not going to go away, Ben said. You'll face consequences for what you've done, but it will be easier than the alternative. The police arrived an hour later. Ben had coordinated with them ahead of time, and they had been waiting for his signal. They arrested David on charges of embezzlement and fraud. I watched as they put him in handcuffs, as they read him his rights, as they led him out of our childhood home. He looked at me one last time as they took him away. There was hatred in his eyes, but also something else. Defeat, resignation, the knowledge that he had gambled everything on his cruelty and lost. My mother collapsed into tears after he was gone. I sat beside her on the couch and held her while she cried. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I should have known. I should have protected you. You didn't know, I said, though part of me still felt the sting of her earlier betrayal, her willingness to believe David over me. He fooled all of us. It took 6 months for everything to be resolved legally. David pleaded guilty to embezzlement and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 years in prison. The settlement agreement was voided, and I received my full inheritance, including the share of the family business. Lily's adoption was finalized in a small courthouse ceremony that felt more meaningful than any of David's elaborate wedding had been. The judge who signed the papers smiled down at Lily and said, "Young lady, you are officially and legally the daughter of Zelda Miller. Congratulations." Lily beamed up at me, and I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of fear and anxiety that had been there for years finally releasing. I used part of my inheritance to pay off all my debts, to move us into a better apartment with actual bedrooms instead of us sharing a studio. I put money into a trust for Lily's college education, making sure she would never have to worry the way I had worried. I invested in the family business, working with the board to clean up David's messes and rebuild the company's reputation. But more importantly, I started to rebuild myself. I went to therapy, finally dealing with the trauma of Mark's abandonment, of David's abuse, of all the years I had spent feeling like I wasn't enough. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize toxic behavior, to value my own worth. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with during my marriage and the difficult years after. I discovered that there were people who genuinely cared about me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. My relationship with my mother improved slowly. She was devastated by David's crimes, by her own failure to see what was happening. We went to family therapy together, working through decades of miscommunication and hurt. It wasn't perfect, and there were still painful moments, but we were building something real, something honest. Veronica surprised me by staying in touch. We weren't friends exactly, but we had a respect for each other. Two women who had both been manipulated by the same man and had found the strength to fight back. She had used the divorce settlement to start a foundation helping victims of financial abuse, and she asked me to serve on the board. I agreed, finding a strange sense of purpose in helping others avoid what I had gone through. 1 year after David's arrest, I took Lily back to the beach. Not the Hamptons, not the scene of our humiliation, but a quiet stretch of coastline in Maine where we could walk along the sand and watch the waves without any ghosts haunting us. Lily ran ahead of me, chasing seagulls, laughing in that pure, unself-conscious way that children have. She had healed from the trauma of the wedding, with help from a child therapist and a lot of love and patience. She rarely asked about Uncle David anymore. He was a distant figure from her past, not part of her present or future. I watched her play, and I thought about how far we had come. A year ago, I had been broken, frightened, convinced that I was going to lose everything. But I had fought back. I had found allies. I had discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. David had tried to make me believe I was worthless, that I was nothing without his approval or the family's acceptance. He had tried to convince me that Lily wasn't really mine, that our bond was somehow less real because we didn't share DNA. He had been wrong about all of it. Lily ran back to me, her cheeks flushed from the wind, her hair wild and tangled. "Mommy, look what I found!" She held out a perfect spiral shell, pink and white and unblemished. "That's beautiful, baby," I said, kneeling down to examine it with her. "Can we keep it forever?" she asked. "Forever," I promised. She threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tight. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in the world." We sat together on the beach, watching the sun start to set over the water. The horizon was painted in shades of orange and pink and gold, beautiful and endless. It felt like a promise of better things to come. I thought about David, locked away in prison, stripped of everything he had stolen. I thought about the people he had hurt, the lives he had damaged in his quest for power and control. Part of me felt satisfaction at his downfall, at the justice that had finally caught up with him. But mostly, I just felt tired of it all, ready to leave it behind. I had spent so many years defined by my relationship to David, by the ways he had hurt me, by the need to prove myself worthy in comparison to him. But I didn't need to do that anymore. I had my own life now, my own purpose, my own definition of success that had nothing to do with him. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Lily asked, touching my cheek with her small hand. I hadn't even realized tears were running down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of relief, of gratitude for everything we had survived and everything that lay ahead of us. "Happy tears, baby," I said, wiping my eyes and smiling at her. "Just happy tears." She seemed satisfied with that answer, and went back to collecting shells, her little bucket filling up with treasures. I watched her and thought about the future. I thought about the college fund that would give her opportunities I had never had. I thought about the stable home we now had, the therapy and support systems in place to help her grow into a strong, confident woman. I thought about the example I was setting for her, showing her that it was possible to stand up to bullies, to fight for justice, to rebuild after devastation. Most importantly, I thought about the lesson she would carry with her. That family isn't just about blood or biology. Family is about love, commitment, presence. It's about showing up every day, through the hard times and the good times. It's about protecting each other and fighting for each other and choosing each other, over and over again. David had tried to use the fact that Lily wasn't biologically mine as a weapon. He had tried to make me feel ashamed of it, to make me doubt the validity of our bond. But he had failed completely. Because every day I spent with Lily, every milestone we celebrated, every challenge we overcame together, only reinforced what I had always known. She was my daughter, fully and completely, and nothing David said or did could change that. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Miller Industries, the family business that my father had built from nothing and that David had nearly destroyed. The board members sat around the long mahogany table, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Ben sat beside me, still serving as my legal counsel and, over time, as a trusted friend. I had called this meeting to announce my decision about the company. After David's conviction, I had become the majority shareholder. I could have sold my shares, walked away with a substantial fortune, and never looked back. Many people had advised me to do exactly that, to cut all ties with the source of so much pain. But I had thought about it carefully, talked it through in therapy, discussed it with my mother and with Ben, and I had realized something. The company wasn't David. It was my father's legacy, the work of his lifetime. It employed hundreds of people who had nothing to do with David's crimes. And it represented an opportunity to do something meaningful, to build something good from the ashes of David's corruption. I've decided to stay, I announced to the board. I'm going to take an active role in running this company. I want to rebuild the culture here, to create an environment based on integrity and respect rather than fear and manipulation. I want to make this a company that my father would have been proud of. There were murmurs around the table, some approving, some skeptical. I understood their doubts. I had no formal business training, no track record in corporate management. But I had something else, a clear vision of what this company should be and a deep commitment to making it happen. I know I have a lot to learn, I continued. And I'm going to be leaning heavily on all of you for guidance and expertise. But I also know that we need to make some fundamental changes. David's way of doing business nearly destroyed us. We're going to do things differently now. Over the next year, I threw myself into learning everything I could about the business. I took courses in management and accounting. I shadowed different department heads to understand how each division worked. I listened to employees at all levels, asking them what they needed, what wasn't working, what they would change if they could. I discovered that many people had known David was corrupt, but had been too afraid to speak up. I created anonymous reporting systems and made it clear that retaliation would not be tolerated. I fired the executives who had been complicit in David's schemes and promoted people based on merit and integrity rather than their willingness to look the other way. It was hard work, harder than anything I had ever done. There were days when I questioned whether I was capable of it, whether I had made the right choice. But then I would see the changes taking hold, the culture shifting, the company becoming something better, and I would know it was worth it. Lily adjusted to our new life with the resilience of childhood. She made friends at her new school, joined the art club, and developed a passion for painting. Our apartment walls were covered with her artwork, colorful explosions of creativity that made me smile every time I looked at them. She asked about David occasionally, usually when she was processing something difficult. Why was Uncle David so mean? She asked one night as I was tucking her into bed. I had learned from her therapist that honesty, age-appropriate honesty, was important. Uncle David had some problems, I said carefully. He made some very bad choices, and he hurt people. Sometimes grown-ups don't handle their feelings well, and they take it out on others. Did he go to jail because he was mean to me? He went to jail because he broke the law, because he stole money and hurt a lot of people. What he did to you was wrong, but it was part of a bigger pattern of bad behavior. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. I'm glad you're my mom, she finally said. My real mom. I'm glad I'm your mom too, I said, kissing her forehead. And you're my real daughter, always and forever. She smiled and snuggled into her blankets, satisfied. As I turned off her light and closed her door, I felt that familiar wave of gratitude wash over me. We had made it. We had survived the worst that David could throw at us, and we had come out stronger on the other side. My mother became more involved in our lives as time went on. She had been shattered by David's betrayal and crimes, but she was working through it in therapy. She and I were learning to communicate honestly, to address the patterns of favoritism and denial that had allowed David to operate unchecked for so long. One afternoon, about 18 months after David's arrest, my mother and I sat in her garden in Connecticut while Lily played on the swing set that had once been mine and David's. The late summer sun was warm, and the air smelled like roses and cut grass. I failed you, my mother said suddenly. All those years I failed to protect you from your brother. Mom, you didn't know. But I should have, she insisted. I saw the signs. The way he belittled you, the way he always had to win, had to be the center of attention. I told myself it was normal sibling rivalry, that you would both grow out of it, but it wasn't normal. And I enabled it by always making excuses for him, by asking you to be the bigger person, to keep the peace. I was quiet for a moment, watching Lily swing higher and higher, her laughter carrying across the yard. I'm not going to lie and say it doesn't hurt, I finally said. It did hurt, feeling like you always took his side, like my feelings didn't matter as much as keeping him happy. But I also understand that he manipulated you too. He was very good at it. That's no excuse, my mother said firmly. I was the parent. I should have done better. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you and Lily. She had already started. She had set up a trust fund for Lily that was separate from anything related to the company or the estate. She came to visit regularly, actually spending time with us rather than just brief, obligatory appearances. She went to Lily's school events and art shows. She was, for the first time in a long time, actually present. You're doing it now, I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. You're showing up now. That's what matters. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching Lily play, and it felt like healing. Not complete healing, because some wounds leave scars that never fully fade, but healing nonetheless. Ben became an unexpected constant in our lives. What had started as a professional relationship had grown into a genuine friendship. He came over for dinner sometimes, helped Lily with her homework, offered advice and support as I navigated the challenges of running a company. People started to ask if we were dating, but it wasn't like that, or at least not yet. We were both cautious, both carrying our own baggage from past relationships. But there was something there, a possibility of something more, and we were taking our time exploring it. You've come a long way, he said to me one evening as we sat on my apartment balcony after Lily had gone to bed. The city stretched out below us, a million lights twinkling in the darkness. So have you, I pointed out. My case had been career-defining for him, leading to more high-profile clients and a growing reputation as a lawyer who fought for the underdog. I mean emotionally, he clarified. When you first came to my office, you were so beaten down, so scared. You couldn't see your own strength, but it was always there. I didn't feel strong. That's when you're strongest, Ben said. When you keep going even though you're terrified, even though you don't believe in yourself yet, that's real courage. I thought about that, about the journey I had been on. He was right. I had changed. I stood up straighter now. I spoke with more confidence. I made decisions and stood by them. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own worth. But more than anything, I had learned that I didn't need anyone else's approval to know that I was enough. 2 years after the wedding that had changed everything, I received a letter from David. It was forwarded through Ben, who called me before I opened it to make sure I was prepared. You don't have to read it, he said. You don't owe him anything. I know, I said, but I'm curious. The letter was short, written in David's precise handwriting on prison stationery. He didn't apologize, not exactly. Instead, he wrote about how he had time to think, about how he was starting to understand the mistakes he had made. He wrote that he hoped someday I might be willing to talk to him, to hear his side of things. He wrote that he was sorry about Lily, that he had taken things too far. I read it twice, then folded it up and put it in a drawer. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I would be ready for that conversation, ready to hear whatever explanations or justifications he wanted to offer. But not yet. I didn't need his apology or his version of events to move forward with my life. I had already done that without him. Lily was 8 years old when she asked me about her biological parents for the first time. We were making dinner together, and she was telling me about a school project on family trees. Everyone has to include their parents and grandparents, she said. But I don't know about my real parents, the ones before you and Daddy Mark. My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. What do you want to know, honey? Who were they? Why did they give me away? I had known this conversation was coming. I had prepared for it with her therapist, had thought through how to be honest without overwhelming her with information she wasn't ready for. Your birth mother was a woman who was going through a very difficult time, I said carefully. She made the brave decision to ask someone else to take care of you because she couldn't do it herself. She wanted you to have a good life, even though she couldn't give you one. And my birth father? I don't know much about him, sweetheart. Mark never told me very much. Do you think they think about me sometimes? I'm sure they do, I said, though I had no idea if that was true. But the important thing to remember is that you have a family who loves you very much. You have me, and you have Grandma Eleanor, and you have all the people who choose to be in your life. Family isn't just about who gave birth to you. It's about who shows up for you every day. Lily thought about that for a moment, then nodded. I'm glad you're my mom. She said, not for the first time, and probably not for the last. Me too, baby. Me too. As she got older, I knew there would be more questions, more complicated conversations about identity and belonging. But we would face them together, just like we had faced everything else. 3 years after David's arrest, Miller Industries had fully recovered. We had new clients, a stellar reputation, and a workplace culture that people actually wanted to be part of. I had proven to myself more than anyone else that I was capable of leading the company my father had built. But I had also realized that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in boardrooms and business meetings. My passion was elsewhere, in helping people who were going through what I had gone through. I stepped back from day-to-day operations at Miller Industries, appointing a CEO I trusted to run things while I remained as board chair. And I used my resources and experience to start a nonprofit organization focused on helping people escape toxic family situations and financial abuse. The organization, which I named Phoenix House after the mythical bird that rises from its own ashes, provided legal assistance, therapy, financial counseling, and practical support to people trying to rebuild their lives. We helped people navigate complex legal situations like contested wills and fraudulent documents. We connected people with employment opportunities and housing. We created support groups where people could share their experiences and realize they weren't alone. Veronica joined me as co-founder, using her connections and resources to help get the organization off the ground. Patricia Reeves became our first employee, bringing her insider knowledge of corporate corruption to help others identify and document financial abuse. The work was hard and often heartbreaking. We heard stories that made David's cruelty seem almost mild by comparison. But we also saw people transform, saw them go from broken and defeated to strong and empowered. Every person we helped felt like a small victory against all the Davids of the world, all the people who tried to control and manipulate and destroy others for their own gain. Lily, now 10 years old, sometimes came to the office with me on weekends. She liked to draw pictures for the clients, colorful messages of hope that we hung on the walls. "I want to help people like you do, Mommy," she told me one day, "when I grow up." "You already do help people," I said, gesturing to her artwork brightening the office walls. "Every single day." She beamed with pride, and I felt my heart swell. Whatever challenges she would face in life, whatever questions about her origins or identity might arise, I knew she had a strong foundation. She knew she was loved, she knew she had value, she knew that she could survive difficult things and come out stronger. 4 years after the wedding, I stood in front of a crowd of 200 people at a fundraising gala for Phoenix House. Many of the people in the audience were donors and supporters, but some were clients who had rebuilt their lives with our help. They were there to share their stories, to show others that recovery and redemption were possible. I had been asked to give the opening remarks, and I had spent weeks trying to figure out what to say. How could I sum up everything I had learned, everything I had been through, in a few minutes? In the end, I decided to just tell the truth. 4 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I attended a wedding where my brother publicly humiliated my 6-year-old daughter in front of hundreds of people. He called her a fake daughter, questioned her legitimacy in our family, and used her innocence as a weapon against me. It was one of the worst moments of my life. I paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. Lily was there in the front row, sitting next to my mother, both of them watching me with pride and love. But it was also the moment that changed everything, I continued. Because that humiliation, that cruelty, finally forced me to see what I had been avoiding for years. That the relationship with my brother was toxic and destructive, and that I deserved better. My daughter deserved better. I told them about the journey that followed, about discovering David's fraud, about finding allies like Ben and Veronica and Patricia, about learning to fight back. I told them about the legal battles and the emotional struggles and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that everything is perfect now," I said. "I still have hard days. I still struggle with self-doubt and anxiety. The trauma of what I went through doesn't just disappear, but I'm here. I'm standing. I'm thriving. And more importantly, I'm helping others do the same." I gestured to the people around the room. Everyone here has a story. Everyone here has survived something. And that survival, that resilience, that refusal to stay down, that's what Phoenix House is built on. We rise from the ashes of our worst experiences, and we help others do the same. The applause was thunderous. People stood, and I saw tears on many faces. Lily was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt, her face split in a huge grin. After the gala, as people mingled and shared stories over drinks and hors d'oeuvres that I had actually been able to afford this time, Lily came up and hugged me tight. "I'm proud of you, Mommy," she said. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart," I said. "You're the bravest person I know." "Really?" "Really. You went through something scary and confusing when you were little, but you didn't let it break you. You're kind and creative and strong. You're everything I could have hoped for in a daughter." "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too, more than you'll ever know." As the night went on and I watched the community we had built come together in support of our mission, I thought about David locked away in prison. I wondered if he ever thought about what he had lost, if he ever regretted his choices. I wondered if he understood that his cruelty had backfired spectacularly, that instead of destroying me, it had forged me into someone stronger. But mostly, I realized I didn't care. His opinion, his regret or lack thereof, his understanding or his denial, none of it mattered anymore. He had no power over me. He couldn't hurt me or my daughter ever again. I had taken everything he had tried to use against me, every wound he had inflicted, and I had transformed it into something meaningful. My pain had become purpose. My survival had become a roadmap for others. That night, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, I stood on my balcony looking out at the city. The lights stretched out endlessly, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. Somewhere out there, someone was going through what I had gone through, feeling as hopeless and trapped as I had once felt, but they would find their way out. Maybe with Phoenix House's help, maybe on their own, maybe with unexpected allies like I had found, but they would survive, they would heal, they would rise, because that's what we do. We endure, we adapt, we fight, we protect the people we love, we refuse to let the cruelty of others define us. I thought about Lily sleeping peacefully in her room, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted and valued. I thought about my mother, finally learning to show up and be present. I thought about Ben and Veronica and Patricia and all the others who had stood with me when I needed them most. I thought about Phoenix House and all the people we would help, all the lives we would change. And I thought about myself, about the woman I had become. Not perfect, not without scars, but strong, resilient, whole. David had tried to tell me I wasn't worthy of my father's legacy, that I didn't deserve a place in the family, that my love for my daughter was somehow false or invalid because we didn't share DNA. He had been wrong about every single thing. I was worthy. I was deserving. My love was real and powerful and transformative. And I had proven it, not to him, but to myself. That was all that mattered. The city sparkled below me, full of possibility and promise. Tomorrow, I would wake up and go to work helping people rebuild their lives. Tomorrow, Lily would go to school and learn and grow and become more fully herself. Tomorrow, my mother would call to check in, continuing the slow work of repairing our relationship. Tomorrow, Ben and I might finally have that conversation about whether our friendship could become something more. Tomorrow was full of potential, unmarred by David's shadow. But tonight, I just stood in the cool air and breathed, grateful for everything I had survived, everything I had learned, everyone I had become. I was Zelda Miller. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother, a leader, a friend. I was enough, exactly as I was. And I was finally, truly free.